Grand jurors. Just a week ago, last Saturday, I was in Des Moines, Iowa for a meeting, and they had a speaker there that had just been on a federal grand jury in Milwaukee, Wisconsin for 18 months. And he was rather proud of the fact that at the end of their 12 months, the U.S. attorney wanted them to serve an additional 6 months. And it was really kind of painful to have to tell him that the reason that the U.S. attorney wanted them to serve an extra 6 months was because it was a rubber stamp grand jury. They like rubber stamps. And that grand jury had been so willing to serve the U.S. attorney down here. That grand jury, they weren't up here. That grand jury was down here. If you've got a grand jury up here, I can assure you that the U.S. attorney is not going to ask you to serve another 6 months. And so it was kind of painful to kind of communicate with, I had to be very diplomatic and communicate with this fellow and say, hey, the reason they wanted you another 6 months was because you were doing everything they told you. You were a bunch of puppets on the strings, and the strings were controlled by the U.S. attorney. Can a juryman vote against the law? That's not the right term. Now, one of the terms that is used is jury nullification. That's not really the best term either. Now, we talked about the legislative branch of government having the authority, the power, the exclusive, separate power to legislate. They create legislation, and it goes to the president, and it does not become law until the president signs it. If the president does not agree with the legislative branch of government, he has veto power. Veto power. The legislative branch of government then, if they can muster enough votes, they can override the veto, and it will become law. Now, what I'm talking about here is that system of checks and balances. The president is to be a check against the legislative branch of government. He is to use his power of signing a bill or legislation, that he is to use his veto power as a check against the legislative branch of government. They, in turn, the legislative branch, they can use their power to override the veto as a check against the president. Then, of course, after the president, if he signs a bill or the Congress overrides a veto, then the courts will usually get a crack at it to say whether it is constitutional or unconstitutional. The grand jury, by refusing to indict, by refusing to enforce this lower law, they have literally vetoed that law in that particular case. Now, the president, when he vetoes it, it has great coverage, and it covers the entire law. In the grand jury's case, it is only pertaining to that one case that is before them. So, you have a situation here where the law, in some cases, might be proper. But you may have a law here that the U.S. attorney, he has a vendetta against somebody, and he's trying to use the law down here to punish somebody, and the grand jury, they see through that, and they say, no, we're not going to indict, because that's not a proper application of the law. The big thing, however, for this grand jury is to recognize they're supposed to judge the law, this lower law created by the legislative branch, signed by the president, adjudicated to be constitutional. That is lower law. Their responsibility is to examine that law carefully and judge that law. Put the law on trial. The difference between a free society and an authoritarian type of government is the people in a free society must retain the right to judge the law. Where they don't have the right to judge the law, you will have the authoritarian, the dictatorship type of government. in this nation, the judges, the congressmen, the president are not going to tell you that you have the right to judge the law. That's your job and mine, is to reach our countrymen with that information. The fact that we have the right to judge the law. Another question, what is common law? There is considerable confusion about common law. There are two very well-defined kinds of common law. One is called English common law. The other is called Anglo-Saxon common law. And they are directly opposite of each other. If you will look in your volume 1 of your revised codes of the state of California, I believe every single state has the same clause. Volume 1, right very nearly to the beginning of the book, you will see this. It'll read like this. It'll say, if a controversy arises not covered by the statutes of your state, you revert back to the English common law. The English common law says that the people are down here and that the government is free. The English common law says that the government has the authority. The Anglo-Saxon common law, that's where your grand juries and your trial juries came into being. The Anglo-Saxon common law says that the people, that they are sovereign, and that the king or the government is subject to the people. Now that's quite a difference, isn't it? Remember I said there's only two kinds of government? You have government controlled by people or people controlled by government. That's the only kind. I don't care what kind of a label you put on it, democracy, Nazism, socialism, communism, or whatever. You see, it doesn't make any difference if you are executed by a bullet in the back of the head. It doesn't make one bit of difference to you. You're dead. It isn't going to make any difference whether that bullet says democracy. That's what happened to Vicki Weaver up in northern Idaho. That was a democracy. And her son Sammy shot in the back. That bullet said democracy on it. Those people down there in Waco, all those little kids, murdered. It had democracy written all over that atrocity. It could have had communist label on it. It doesn't make any difference. Waco happened because we the people lost control of our government. Common law. I talk about the laws of common sense. Every individual out there, if they have normal mental capacity, has it right between their heads, right between their ears. It's there. Why? Because your God Creator put it there. Your mother at your mother's knee should have been teaching you the difference between right and wrong. They should be teaching you right from wrong in the schools, but that's why we have problems in our schools today, because they say, oh, we can't teach these values. The government schools have to go. The laws of common sense, those are laws that we have readily available, and we function under those laws every day of our lives. Here's the one about the district attorney fired the head of the grand jury, and I've already touched on that.